The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. TIAA makes you a retirement promise, a promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. Learn more at TIAA.org/promises pay off.
LinkedIn presents.
Our task as friends and community is not to repair each other's broken hearts, to heal or to save or to distract or to cheer each other up. We really just need to show up, to be present, to engage in the work of sacred accompaniment.
Happy Friday, everyone. This is the Next Big Idea Daily, and I'm your host, Michael Kovnat. Do you have a lot of good friends? You know, people you can call in the middle of the night when you're having a crisis? If you do, congratulations. But if not, don't feel too bad. You may be lonely, but you're not alone, because therapists and physicians up to and including the current Surgeon General say we're living through a crisis of isolation, loneliness, and lack of connection. There are a lot of cutting-edge theories about how to handle the problem, but some of the best ideas might be some of the oldest ones. And it's those ideas that Sharon Brous offers in her new book, The Amen Effect, Ancient Wisdom to Mend Our Broken Hearts and World. Sharon is an influential speaker and the co-founder and senior rabbi of ICAR, a Jewish congregation in Los Angeles. Our curator, Dan Pink, says her book is a powerful call for each of us to show up for others, see them fully, and hold them close. Here's Sharon with a few of her big ideas.
Loneliness and social alienation pose a grave threat to our health, safety, and well-being. We are living through an era marked by loneliness, social alienation, and isolation, a condition only exacerbated by COVID. And it's breaking our spirits, it is hurting our bodies, and it is threatening our democracy. Loneliness is more an inner state than an external reality. It's about feeling alone, not necessarily about being alone. It impacts all of us, single and partnered, young and old, urban, suburban, rural. Loneliness is vastly prevalent, and it's so dangerous that it's now considered a public health crisis, both in the United States and around the world, a crisis that has reached epidemic proportions. Loneliness is hurting our spirits. It's leading us to experience a profound sense of disconnection, despondency, and despair. It's hurting our bodies. Acute loneliness has the physical impact on the body of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it's threatening our democracies. As Hannah Arendt, the great 20th century philosopher, argued, widespread social alienation is a precondition for the flourishing of violent political extremism. Terror, she wrote, can rule absolutely only over men who are isolated against each other. Therefore, one of the primary concerns of all tyrannical governments is to bring this isolation about. Isolation may be the beginning of terror. It certainly is its most fertile ground. It always is its result. For Arendt, isolation is impotence. The more limited our meaningful contact with one another, the more we lack the ability to act together toward the common good, let alone to respond effectively to the great dangers we face. Alone and apart, we are powerless. It is a matter of the greatest urgency that we address this crisis, our instinct to retreat from one another, with a reinvigorated commitment to step toward one another instead. We are biologically, psychologically, and spiritually hardwired for connection and belonging, so err on the side of presence. My grandma Millie had a rule. You show up for the celebration. She framed her rule like this: if God forbid you would fly in for the funeral, you better find a way to make it there for the wedding. My grandma lived to 98 and my grandfather to 90, and I attribute their longevity to the fact that they went dancing every night. They never turned down a Doers on the Rocks before dinner, and they embodied to the very end this rule. They showed up. Life is precarious, but you're alive, so show up in body and spirit. Now, there's an assumption that's embedded in my grandma's rule. You'll show up for the celebration because you'd obviously be there for the heartache. But that, I have learned, is not something to be taken for granted either. Some years ago, my mentor lost his mother. Now, one of his superpowers is that everyone who's ever met him feels that they're his closest friend. So when my mentor's mother died, I imagined him suffocating under the weight of 1,000 well-intentioned best friends, overwhelming him with lasagna and lingering hugs. I wrote a sweet letter and put it in the mail. I didn't fly in for the funeral, and to my shame, I didn't even pick up the phone to check on him. When I saw him a few months later, he castigated me. "I don't want excuses," he said. "I needed you and you weren't there. Next time, show up." It was at this point that I had to amend my grandma's rule. You show up for the celebration and you also show up for the funeral. You err on the side of presence. Biologists, neurologists, psychologists, and clergy all attest to the same fundamental truth. Human beings need connection. It's connection that gives our lives meaning and purpose. From a spiritual standpoint, we are meant to live dialogically. The gift that God gave humanity from the start, according to the Hebrew Bible, was the gift of one another. We have a profound human need to be seen as we truly are, which makes social connection not a luxury, but a necessity. Relationships are simply core to our being. It's not good for a person to be fundamentally alone. Seeing one another in celebration, sorrow, and solidarity, showing up for each other in the most challenging moments and the moments in between is essential to our well-being. There are so many reasons why we pull away from each other. There are so many barriers to honest, heartfelt presence and condition, chief among them the faulty notion that our work, especially in the most painful moments, is not just to be present with each other, but to fix one another. Instead, as one of my dear congregants, a bereaved father, shared with me after his son's tragic death, what people need in anguish more than anything else is witness. We don't need people to fix us, he told me. We need to not be abandoned. We need people to be willing to sit with us in the pain. Our task as friends and community is not to repair each other's broken hearts, to heal or to save or to distract or to cheer each other up. We really just need to show up, to be present, to engage in the work of sacred accompaniment. We are suffering from a massive curiosity deficit. Through reclaiming curiosity and wonder, we rehumanize ourselves and one another. Just as a lonely person can become a sick person in body and spirit, a society of lonely, atomized, socially disconnected people will become a sick society, one susceptible to extremist ideologies and powerless to resist dangerous social and political upheaval. For decades, we have witnessed a mushrooming of social alienation and disconnectedness, and we seem to have reached a crisis point. Nearly a third of Americans today report that they do not know their next-door neighbors, and an astonishing 20% of Americans report that they have no close personal relationships at all. And that number has more than doubled in the past decade. Imagine that. No neighbor to knock on the door just to check in on you when you're ill. No one to process the fear, confusion, or displacement of these uncertain times. No one to help us hold our personal or collective grief. This level of isolation and disconnectedness is not only concerning, it's dangerous. And this crisis of disconnection is exacerbated by another trend of our time, tribalization. Human beings from birth are hardwired for connection, but we are also by nature tribal beings, meaning we instinctively look to build and reinforce those connections with people that we perceive to be like us, whether that means they look like us, talk like us, pray like us, or vote like us. Tribal attachments can be meaningful and beneficial. A sense of belonging can be a source of great strength and purpose. The tribal mindset leads us to fight mightily for those that we see as part of our tribe. But there's also a dangerous side to this instinct. Ironically, the stronger the bonds of connection we have to those inside our group, the weaker the bonds are to those outside our group, leaving us indifferent or even hostile toward people who are not in our tribe. This is the cost to self-segregating in our tribal bubbles. whether organized around race, religion, ethnicity, or ideology. Curiosity is the birthplace of compassion, but the greater the psychological distance between us and the other, the less curious we are about one another. When we don't wonder what the other is thinking or feeling, or where the pain comes from, when we don't interrogate our presuppositions, our hearts close to one another. This leaves us less understanding of other perspectives and more entrenched in our own dogmas and narratives. It also leaves us more susceptible to dangerous fringe views. A society devoid of empathy is at great risk of falling into patterns of dehumanization that have throughout history led to the most extreme acts of violence. Extremist movements are already testing the very limits of our democracies, and all indications are that this will only worsen in the days ahead unless we find the appetite for a dramatic course correction. It is precisely now, when our instinct is to recoil from one another, that the need for an ethos of sensitive, sincere encounter is vital and urgent, not only for us as individuals, not only for our families and for our communities, but for our society. When we turn to one another with open-hearted curiosity, it's often we who benefit. By affirming another person's humanity, we reinvigorate our own. But there are precious moments when the seeds sown in the field of wonder flourish into something unexpected and truly wonderful in the world. This can be the beginning of something new. Deep, open-hearted curiosity can utterly transform our relationships and our society. Human understanding is no substitute for real accountability or for systemic change, but it's also not an impediment to those righteous outcomes. If anything, it may be a prerequisite. Vulnerable, open-hearted engagement is counterinstinctual in our time. And in order to be curious, we must first be safe. But any just society will have to make space for people who see the world in fundamentally different ways, for us to see one another not as enemies, but as fellow human beings, flawed and striving. Wonder and curiosity lead us to sacred encounter. This is not a path toward capitulation, but instead toward sacred recognition of each other's humanity. This may be the best and most enduring way to mend our broken hearts and worlds.
All right, well, that's our show for the week. Take a little time this weekend to connect with your old friends and maybe even make some new ones. I like to think that we here at the Next Big Idea Club are your friends, but there's no substitute for the real thing. Having said that, you can think of us as part of your extended support network. We've got inspirational and useful ideas to share with you via our app and our subscription book club. You can find out about those at nextbigideaclub.com. And sign up for one of my newsletters. I've got a brand new Book of the Day newsletter on Substack, along with my weekly roundup of the best new nonfiction. You can sign up for those using the links in the episode notes. This week's episodes were written by me, Michael Kovnat, and edited by Kayla Bissinger. The Next Big Idea Daily is part of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. We'll see you Monday.